Hemisphere.
Well,
And
Mr.
we
President,
cannot have
apologies for the interruption, but on your point, considering that Venezuela really isn't recognizing the ICJ, you're saying let it settle the dispute. You could see a situation where Venezuela goes ahead and tries to interfere in your efforts to open up leasing contracts for oil companies, oil discovered there back in 2015. This could escalate. What nations have voiced support for you, and what are you willing to do to defend what you say is your territory?
So the Prime Minister was interrupted here by this news anchor to essentially be asked, who versus who? What nations are going to be involved in this conflict? You'll see that the Prime Minister was really trying to convey a message of peace, and I want to start this video from the beginning to go through that.
Venezuela claims its citizens voted overwhelmingly in favor of a referendum that aims to take over an oil-rich region of Guyana, its neighbor. It's unclear exactly how many people actually voted, though, but both countries do have a long-running border dispute.
That's right. The Guyanese president, therefore, is calling on Venezuela to respect the process of the International Court of Justice as it reviews the land dispute matter. Just last week, the court ordered Venezuela not to take any action that would alter Guyana's control over the territory. You see it highlighted there on your screen.
So joining us now is Guyanese President Mohamed Irfan Ali to talk a little bit more about this dispute. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. President. So here we have a situation where Venezuela has long disputed this border, right? And it is currently being looked at by international courts. On the flip side, we know it's an oil-rich region. We know that Nicolas Maduro is facing an election in the coming year, and Venezuela is in the middle of an economic collapse. What do you believe is behind this uptick in this dispute?
Well, first of all, I want to make it very clear that the borders were settled in 1899. Venezuela and then British Guyana participated fully in the settlement of this border. They both agreed on the border. The border was then enacted in Venezuela, local laws, and also stamps were produced with the borders as it exists today. When we were about to get independence, Venezuela raised a controversy and the Geneva Agreement was entered into. In that agreement, it provided that if the controversy could not have been settled between the parties, then the United Nations Secretary General would determine the mechanism to settle that. And the mechanism that was determined by the United Nations Secretary General was the ICJ. And that is where we believe this matter must be settled. But as you rightfully said, Venezuela is faced with many challenges, political challenges, democratic challenges, and challenges within its society itself. Many believe.
Great historical wrap-up here. Great description that the ICJ should settle this. And also great empathy for the position that Venezuela is in, right?
That this is a distraction to what obtains in Venezuela now. But we are taking this very seriously because of the narrative that is coming out of Venezuela, the threat that comes out of Venezuela. And recently, Venezuela opened defiance of the International Court of Justice when the leaders there basically said they will not adhere to the orders of the ICJ. Now, this is an important issue for us in this region because we want this region to remain a zone of peace. We want this is an important part of the Western Hemisphere.
Well, Mr. President,
cannot have
apologies for the interruption, but on your point, considering that Venezuela really isn't recognizing the ICJ, you're saying let it settle the dispute. You could see a situation where Venezuela goes ahead and tries to interfere in your efforts to open up leasing contracts for oil companies, oil discovered there back in 2015. This could escalate. What nations have voiced support for you, and what are you willing to do to defend what you say is your territory?
How irresponsible of a question. The Prime Minister is here to convey a message of peace, and this news anchor is asking who versus who. What are you willing to do? Very, very irresponsible here, CBS.
So let me just make a correction. Venezuela is saying that they will not participate, but Venezuela has already participated in the process at the ICJ because Venezuela went twice to the ICJ on the issue of jurisdiction, and the ICJ ruled against Venezuela, saying that the ICJ has jurisdiction to look at this matter. So I think the narrative that they're not recognizing or participating in the ICJ, that narrative.
Great correction here by the Prime Minister. He's explaining that Venezuela has participated appropriately through the mechanism of the ICJ, contrary to what this news anchor was saying. And also, great job of staying on point, staying on this peaceful message.
It's really one of a double standard because they have already participated in the process of the ICJ. They've already gone to the ICJ to seek a ruling on the jurisdiction of the court, and the court ruled twice in favor of Guyana. Now, we have had the OAS in full support of us, the Commonwealth group of countries in full support of us. We have had CARICOM leaders issuing strong statements. And we have had various leaders across the globe. I've been reaching out because our first line of defense is diplomacy. And we've been reaching out to leaders.
Great line here, great message. Again, conveying this message of peace and nonviolence that the first line of defense is diplomacy.
The U.S. is a strong support of Guyana, and also countries, India, we have raised this with India. We have even raised this with Cuba, countries that have a very close relationship with Venezuela, so that they can encourage Venezuela to do what is right and to ensure that they do not act in a reckless or adventurous manner that can disrupt the peace within the zone. But we are also preparing for the worst case scenario. We are preparing with our allies, with our friends, to ensure that we are in a position to defend what is ours, the executable.
So, Mr. President, just to piggyback off of Errol's question, what does that mean? What does that mean, putting yourself in a position to defend your borders?
It means...
Again, they really jumped on this idea of defense and this idea of what you're going to do, almost essentially ignoring his previous messages of ICJ and peace and nonviolence.
Doing the work in educating the world. It means informing all the relevant authorities and agencies of what is happening. It means constant monitoring and observation of what Venezuela is doing. It means ensuring that our diplomatic work is at its highest level, because we want this to be resolved in a peaceful manner. It means encouraging the Venezuelans and the Venezuelan people, the leadership of Venezuela, to do what is right for the region, to accept a rule-based system, to work with the ICJ, to respect the outcome of the ICJ. And it also means to prepare our...
The Prime Minister did a really good job here of not entertaining the questions really asked by CBS, but to continue conveying this message of peace and nonviolence and settling through the ICJ and settling through diplomacy. I think this is a really irresponsible job from CBS here. In these few minutes, they've asked 3 questions. The first was just an opening question. The other 2 were trying to get the Prime Minister, in my opinion, to explain how they would retaliate, to explain how they would defend, to explain how they're preparing from a weapons perspective, from a military perspective. I think this is extremely irresponsible reporting. I think this is disgusting reporting. And I think it's fanning the flames of international conflict. I look at CBS anchors here and I see this as extremely wrong and very uninformed reporting. Great job by the Prime Minister here to stay on message. Great job by the Prime Minister of explaining the situation and the history and the context behind the situation. and not letting these disgusting CBS anchors get him knocked off of his message to keep essentially both Venezuelans and the Guyanese safe and this region of the world in peace.